Hi, it's Carolyn. I'm here to help you learn how to bake and decorate amazing cakes. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to decorate this adorable Hello Kitty cake. If you want to skip the intro and get right into the video, there are chapters linked below. Now, like always, I am starting with my cake already baked, filled, iced, and it's in the refrigerator waiting to be decorated. And I have tons of videos showing you how I do that process that will be linked in the description. And also any of the tools that I use and any other videos that I reference will be linked down there as well. So let's get started. All right, guys, I have Gumtex powder, Tylose powder, CMC powder. It's all basically the same thing. It's mixed into my fondant. I only use marshmallow fondant. Store-bought fondant just gives you elephant skin, and it does not work as well as marshmallow fondant. I sprinkle a little bit on there, knead it into the fondant, roll it out, and let it sit. And it's just going to set up so much harder, be so much easier to work with. It's going to be stretchy. It's just so much better with this Tylose powder. I'm going to link this below. I am rolling my fondant out pretty thin and using my fondant smoother just to get rid of any air bubbles. You can see how thin this fondant is. And then I'm just going to get a cutting board so I can set all these ruffles on there. I'm using a circle cutter out of that little set there, and I'm cutting a bunch of these circles out of the fondant. And once I do that, I have some flour foam here and a ball tool, and I'm just putting a circle on that foam and just thinning out the edges. And then I'm using the claw. You're scared of the claw. And I'm just pushing that into the claw and pinching the very bottom to form a tail. That tail is going to go into the cake. So again, I'm just carefully thinning the edges and then gathering it at the bottom so it makes like a little ruffle at the top. And yes, I know my nails and the flour foamer and the fondant are all the same color. Little happy accident there. So I made about, I don't know, 50, 75 of these because they're only going on the bottom half of the cake. And once I have that all done, I'm going to set those aside. Now, I got that cake out of the refrigerator about 20 minutes ago so that icing could soften. I have some piping gel and a paintbrush, and I'm just getting the piping gel on the bottom third of the cake, and then I'm thinning it out with some water. And I just want to make sure I don't go above that bottom third of the cake so you can't see the piping gel because that's where I'm sticking the ruffles. I mark the front of the cake with a Sharpie marker, and then I have a Dresden tool, and you see I'm pressing the tail of the ruffle into the cake. Now, this icing is a little soft, so I can easily press this in here. So I'm trying to make sure that I'm lining these up so you can't see any of the icing behind it. So I'm getting that tail against the cake and then just using my Dresden tool to gently press that against the cake. Now, these ruffles, I didn't let dry too much because I don't want them to crack as I'm putting them into the cake. So I just made the ruffles and I'm immediately putting them on the cake so they will hold their shape and they will dry to the correct shape while they're on the cake. And again, I'm going on the second row and I'm making sure that I put them on there so you can't see any icing underneath. And then I had to get a little bit more piping gel and water down for this third row as well. Carefully pressing the Dresden tool in there to make sure that I don't distort the ruffle. I'm just pressing the tail into that icing. And then once I have all of these done, I'm taking my ruler. This is where I'm putting the name. So I need to measure how wide and how tall the name has to be. And I think if I have like 4 inches by 2 inches tall or something like that. And there's all the ruffles. Let's put that back in the fridge. Now I have a piece of non-slip pad underneath my cutting board so it doesn't slide around, an X-Acto knife with a wet paper towel, a Dresden tool, and a little bit of water. And again, I printed that out the size I wanted it to be. That font is called Just Simple, and I rolled that gray fondant out pretty thin, and I'm doing my trace, cut, and smooth method to trace this onto the fondant. So I'm using my Dresden tool. Make sure you get all of those inner pieces as well, and I'm not pressing too hard. I don't want to poke a hole in the fondant. I just want to transfer the line on there, and now I'm making sure I cut out all of the inner pieces first before I cut the rest of the letters out. And I like to take my tools and my fingers to smooth the inner pieces before I start to cut the rest of it out. And then again, once I have it all cut out, I'm just resting it on the paper so it holds its shape, just using my tools and my fingers to smooth it out, realign that on top of the paper, and let's set that aside. Now I printed this Hello Kitty out the size I wanted it to be. I have some thin white fondant, and this picture will be linked in the description. And I want to have a black border around all these pieces, so I am tracing these white pieces exactly along the line. Sometimes I trace on the outside of the line, but this I'm going exactly on the line. Where that bow is, I had to look past the bow and try to figure out where the ear is and where the rest of the head is, making little marks where the eyes and the nose go and the whiskers as well. And let's pull that back. And now I just want to cut out all of these little pieces. And again, once I cut them out, I'm going to take my fingers and my tools and smooth all my cuts. Because anytime I cut anything out of fondant, the edges are jagged and you just need to make it look nice and pretty. And then I'm going to do the same thing for all of the other pieces. So I have some light pink fondant and I'm tracing the shirt onto there, smooth my cuts. And then I'm tracing all of these darker pink pieces onto the darker pink fondant. Now, I don't always cut everything with my X-Acto knife. Sometimes I use piping tips just to make it a little easier. So I am tracing this part onto the fondant and then I'm using piping tips for those smaller sections. And making sure I always smooth all of my cuts. Now I'm using a piping tip to cut that in half. So it's going to contour to that center piece. Now I have a thin piece of black fondant and I'm getting a little bit of water behind each of these and sticking it down. And when I stick it down, I'm using that end of my paintbrush just to make sure there's an even black border going around the whole thing. And then I'm taking my X-Acto knife, getting pretty close and just cutting an even black border around the entire bow, taking my fingers and smoothing my cuts. Now I have some thicker black fondant and I want to align these pieces on here first before I glue them down. Once I have them in the right position, I get a little bit of water behind there. Don't put too much water behind these pieces because you don't want it to seep out underneath. So do you see how I'm making sure there's a little black border in between all these pieces to mimic that black line that's in the picture? So I'm carefully getting some water behind all of these pieces and sticking them down. And then since this is a thicker piece of fondant, I need to make a guideline cut first. So I'm sticking the tip of my X-Acto knife into the fondant and just creating this guideline. That way, when I cut this whole thing out, I'm not going to distort the fondant. So once I have this guideline cut, then I'm going to stick the tip of my X-Acto knife all the way down to the cutting board and then use that line as a guide to cut this whole thing out. This way, I'm not going to distort that top edge of the fondant. And then I'm going to flip it over and use my fingers and my tools to smooth out those jagged edges and flip it front and flip it front, flip it over and do the same thing from the front. And now I just want to make the eyes, but they're kind of oval shaped. So I have this round cutter and these tiny pieces are hard to work with, but I'm trying to squeeze it and then pull it into an oblong position so they look oval. I don't have tiny oval cutters like this, so I have to just try to make it look as oval as possible. So I did that for both of the eyes. And then for the nose, I'm doing the same thing. For this little yellow piece, I'm trying to stretch it out a little bit so it goes into an oval shape. Get a little bit of water behind it and put it on that black fondant. And then I'm cutting an even black border behind it and smoothing my cuts. And then I'm getting some water behind the eyes and the nose and sticking that down where I made those little marks in the white fondant. And the same thing for the bow, just getting a little bit of water behind that and sticking that down. Now I need to make the whiskers, so I have some black fondant and I'm just gently rolling this out into a long log and then cutting about 1-inch sections. So I have 6 whiskers here and I'm rolling one end to a point. And I need these to dry so they will hold their shape before I put them onto the face. So I'm just going to set them aside. Now I have this little skewer. I wet this skewer and I'm twisting it in here. I'm screwing it in. Don't jab it in because you don't want to distort the piece. And that's why I rolled that fondant out thicker so that skewer fits in there. So let's set that aside to dry. Now I'm doing the same thing with the number 5. I do have my favorite numbers PDF that has all of my favorite numbers. I'm going to link that below, but I'm tracing this number 5 onto that thin pink fondant and cutting it out, smoothing my cuts, and then I have some thicker black fondant, get some water behind the 5 and stick that down. And since that fondant is thicker, I need to make a guideline cut first, and then once I have that done, I'm cutting the rest of it out. Now, number 5s are so annoying, and 3s and 2s, because they have these little curves in here, so I'm working in little sections so I don't distort the top edge of that inner circle part of the 5. So I'm just trying to gently lift that piece of fondant out
and then cut away the rest of the fondant. And once I have that done, I'm going to take my Dresden tool and smooth those cuts, and then I can cut the rest of this fondant away, just using that guideline that I made to make sure that I don't distort the fondant. And again, like I did before, flip it over, take my fingers and my tools and smooth it from the back and smooth it from the front. And then I'm going to realign that back on the picture and let that dry flat at room temperature. And now I'm making some polka dots. So I just have a piping tip and I'm cutting polka dots out of all of the colors that I'm using on the cake. I have some Rolcom Super Silver powder and I mix it with a little bit of lemon extract. This will be linked in the description for you. And I create a little paste here. And I want to paint the gray fondant silver. So I'm just making sure that I cover all of the edges of the name and the polka dots. You want to make sure you get the top edges and the inner edges as well. And with my polka dots, I like to cut some of them in half, so I'm doing that for all of the colors. And let's set those aside. Now I got that out of the refrigerator. I have some piping gel. I'm getting some piping gel behind the name. You don't want too much piping gel because you don't want the name to slide down the cake. Now remember that icing is cold and I'm not going to mess it up as I work with this. So I'm making sure that cake was facing forward and I put that name down on there and I'm just getting it into the correct position. And then I'm getting some water behind each of these polka dots. Now with those halvesies, I like to stick the flat part of the polka dot near the top of the cake, and then I have some whole polka dots and I have some half polka dots, and this is just the way I like to do polka dots. I just think it looks nice. So I like to make sure the half ones are going against the edge of the cake, and I have all the polka dots on there. Now I'm taking a wet paper towel and cleaning the cake board, and I'm just measuring the ribbon, cutting that, and then I'm taking the edge of the glue stick and just pressing that foil down against the side of the cake drum so it's not bubbling. And I have some non-toxic glue, getting that around the edge, and I also got that around the back of the ribbon, and I am wrapping this ribbon around the cake drum where it overlaps in the back. I just get a little bit more glue down and then stick that down and run my finger over it one more time for good measure. And that looks good. Let's put that back in the refrigerator. Now I need to get the whiskers on, and they sat out for long enough so they're holding their shape. So I'm just getting a little bit of water behind it where it's touching that white part and sticking those down. And now I'm getting a toothpick in that other foot and 2 toothpicks in the bottom of the 5. This way, it's not going to twist when it's in the top of the cake. So I got that cake out of the refrigerator. Now I'm getting some white icing on the bottom of the feet and the 5 wherever it's going to touch the cake, and I'm carefully putting these down into the top of the cake and making sure that it's perfectly vertical. And when I push these down into the cake, some of that icing likes to seep out underneath, so I take a dry paintbrush and wipe it off on a paper towel. So I'm just removing that excess icing so none of it is sticking out. And it looks nice and clean. And now this needs a little bit of curlies. And I have a video showing you how I make these, and I will link that below. But I'm picking out the colors that match the cake, getting a little bit of piping gel down behind them and sticking them down. And here is the adorable Hello Kitty cake.
So there you go. How cute is this cake? I just love this design so much. Now this was based off of another design that I did. My customer originally sent me this picture, and she said she wanted something similar, but I recommended to her that we do something with half ruffles. That way I could fit the name on the front. And I showed her this picture and she really liked that. So I based this design off of one of my previous designs. Now these circle ruffles are easier to do than the petal ruffles, and I've shown how to do petal ruffles in many videos, and the petal ruffles give a fuller look, but they also take way longer to make. But these circle ruffles give a really nice effect in about less than half of the time. So this cake on the inside is a 2-layer torted 6-inch cake, and I have a video where I talk about when I tort and when I don't tort my cakes, and I will link that in the description. And it feeds about 12 to 16 people. So I think that's it. What new techniques did you learn in this video? I would love to know. Leave it in the comments below. And just a reminder, I have a Cake Academy membership program where I can help you elevate your cakes to the next level. All of that information is listed in the description. Please like this video if you liked it, and if you're enjoying my tutorials, I would be so grateful if you could buy me a coffee. My link is down below. And I would love it if you would keep in touch on socials, and you could check out my website. And if you want to stick around, you can watch this video next and hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys. And remember, it's cake, have fun. I will see you on the next one. Bye.